It was a crisp autumn morning when Angela Roberts walked through the revolving doors of Bancroft Capital, one of the largest and most prestigious financial institutions in the city. Her presence was commanding yet understated. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, simple yet elegant, the kind that quietly exuded authority without shouting it. Angela had always believed that power didn't need to be flaunted, it needed to be managed, controlled, and delivered with precision. Today was one of those days where that belief would be tested. The startup, Integra Solutions, had grown from a small consulting firm to a tech powerhouse that specialized in advanced financial analytics. The purpose of her visit to Bancroft Capital wasn't just another business meeting, it was the culmination of years of hard work. She was there to finalize a deal that would integrate her company's cutting-edge software into the bank's infrastructure, revolutionizing how Bancroft managed its clients' wealth. It was the kind of deal that could cement her status in the financial world, lifting Integra to new heights. Angela checked her phone one last time before heading to the elevator. Her assistant had texted her a final reminder of the key points she was set to discuss with the bank's senior executives, including the elusive Jonathan Braden, Bancroft's CEO. Despite her calm exterior, Angela knew that today's meeting could change everything. If the deal went through, her company would become indispensable to some of the wealthiest individuals in the world. The bank lobby was a polished expanse of marble floors and high ceilings, filled with the quiet hum of early morning business. As she crossed the lobby, she noticed a few heads turning in her direction. It wasn't unusual. Angela was accustomed to standing out in predominantly white, male-dominated spaces. At 42, she had carved out a reputation as one of the most innovative leaders in fintech, but that didn't stop the occasional sideways glance. She was often the only black woman in the room, and though she'd learned to navigate these dynamics with grace, it was always a reminder of how far she had come and how far society still had to go. She was greeted by one of the bank's executive assistants, who escorted her to a private waiting area. The assistant, a young woman with a professional but distant smile, handed Angela a cup of coffee as she settled into one of the plush chairs. "Mr. Braden will be with you shortly," the assistant said, her tone polite but perfunctory. Angela nodded and thanked her, though her mind was already shifting gears, mentally preparing for the discussion ahead. She had spent months fine-tuning this deal, working closely with her legal and technical teams to ensure every aspect was aligned. But she also knew that things could go awry in a heartbeat. As she sat there, a subtle tension filled the room. There was something about the atmosphere and underlying unease that Angela couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was just her own nerves getting the better of her. After all, deals of this magnitude didn't happen every day. But no, it was something more. The staff seemed unusually hurried, moving briskly through the corridors with a sense of urgency that contrasted with the calm exterior they projected. Angela's instincts, honed from years of navigating the complexities of both the tech and financial worlds, told her something was off. She sipped her coffee, watching the people around her. Across the room, a man in a dark suit sat, quietly reading through a stack of papers. He glanced up at her briefly before returning to his work. The bank's security, usually discreet, seemed more visible today. Guards stationed at key points in the lobby, subtly monitoring the comings and goings of visitors. Angela noticed one of them watching her a little too intently. She returned his gaze, unwavering, and after a moment he looked away. The tension in the air thickened when her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her assistant back at Integra. "Something strange going on with our system. The firewall flagged unusual activity. Checking now, but thought you should know." Angela's brow furrowed. This wasn't the time for problems back at the office, not today. She quickly responded, telling her assistant to keep her updated but not to overreact. It was likely nothing, just the usual hiccups in system performance. At least she hoped so. Just as Angela tucked her phone back into her bag, the door to the waiting area opened. But instead of Jonathan Braden, a different man entered. Officer Jack Hansen, a middle-aged police officer with graying hair at his temples and a look of quiet authority. He wasn't in uniform, but the badge clipped to his belt and the way he carried himself left no doubt about his profession. "MS?" Roberts Hansen asked, his voice calm but firm. Angela glanced at him, surprised. She wasn't expecting to meet anyone from law enforcement today, much less in the middle of a business negotiation. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I'm afraid I need to ask you a few questions. There's been some concerning activity involving your company, and we'd like to clarify a few things." His tone remained neutral, but Angela could sense the underlying implication. This wasn't just a casual inquiry. Her mind raced. What could he possibly want with her? Integra Solutions was an entirely legitimate business, but she also knew that appearances didn't always matter, especially when it came to law enforcement. "Concerning activity," she repeated, keeping her voice steady. "I'm not sure I understand." "I'm sure you don't," Hansen said, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But I'm afraid this is something we need to address immediately. If you'll come with me, we can talk more privately." Angela's stomach knotted. This wasn't right. She had an important meeting, one that could define the future of her company, and now this. She had dealt with difficult situations before, but being pulled aside by the police in the middle of a high-stakes deal was something entirely different. "I'm here for a meeting," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Can this wait? I'm sure whatever it is can be handled through my legal team." Hansen's expression didn't change. "It's about your company's involvement in a series of financial irregularities. We've received a tip that places you at the center of it. This won't take long, MS Roberts, I promise." Angela's heart sank. Financial irregularities? A tip. None of this made sense. Her company had always operated within the bounds of the law. She was meticulous about that. Yet, here she was, being questioned by a police officer in the middle of a bank. She took a deep breath, weighing her options. Leaving the bank with Hansen would mean postponing her meeting, potentially jeopardizing the deal. But refusing to cooperate with the police could make matters worse. "I need to call my lawyer," she finally said, reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, Hansen took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That won't be necessary, MS Roberts. This is just a conversation. For now." The veiled threat hung in the air between them, thick and heavy. Angela looked at him, her mind racing. This was no simple conversation. Something much larger was at play here, and she was caught in the middle of it. Angela stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. The situation had escalated so quickly, she barely had time to process what was happening. One minute she was on the verge of signing the biggest deal of her career, and the next, she was being confronted by a police officer in the middle of one of the city's most prestigious banks. The words financial irregularities echoed in her mind. This was a term that could ruin businesses, careers, and reputations. It didn't matter if the accusations were baseless, just the mention of it could taint everything she had built. But Angela wasn't the type to back down easily. Years of navigating the corporate world as a black woman had taught her how to stand her ground. Still, something about the officer's demeanor unsettled her. This wasn't just a routine inquiry. There was an edge to his voice, a quiet menace that told her there was more going on than he was letting on. "I'm sorry, officer," she glanced at his badge. Hansen, but I don't understand what's happening. Financial irregularities. Involvement in what exactly? Hansen didn't flinch. It's all part of an ongoing investigation. We've received information linking your company, Integra Solutions, to some suspicious activity. Specifically, large sums of money being moved through accounts that appear to be tied to your firm. Angela blinked, trying to maintain her composure. That's impossible, she said firmly. Integra doesn't engage in any activity like that. We're a financial consulting firm, not a bank. I'm just here to gather information, Hansen replied smoothly, though there was nothing reassuring about his tone. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding, but we need to go over a few things. It's better if we handle this now before it gets out of hand. Before it gets out of hand, Angela repeated, feeling the tension rise in her chest. Look, Officer Hansen, I have a meeting with the CEO of this bank in just a few minutes. Whatever this is, it's going to have to wait until afterward. I'm more than happy to cooperate, but I can't just walk away from an important business meeting based on vague accusations. Hansen's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Angela saw a flash of something darker in his expression. I understand that this meeting is important to you, Ms. Roberts, but this investigation takes precedence. I'm sure you don't want to make things more difficult than they need to be. The implied threat hung in the air, and Angela could feel her pulse quicken. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and now, out of nowhere, this officer was threatening to unravel everything with a few words. But she couldn't afford to panic. She needed to think clearly, and more importantly, she needed to understand what was really happening here. A quiet buzzing came from her pocket, her phone. Angela hesitated for a moment, then glanced down at the screen. It was a text from her assistant. Firewall breach confirmed. Looks like someone's trying to access our client data. We're shutting it down now, but it's bad. Real bad. Call me ASAP. Angela's breath caught in her throat. A firewall breach. An attack on her company's data? It couldn't be a coincidence. Not with everything else happening. But what did it mean? Who would be targeting her company, and why now? She looked back up at Hansen, who was watching her closely, as if waiting for her reaction. The timing of all this was too perfect, too precise. The so-called financial irregularities, the police involvement, the attack on her company's systems. It all seemed like part of a larger plan. But whose plan? And what was the endgame? I need to make a call, Angela said firmly, slipping her phone out of her pocket. Now isn't the time for phone calls, Ms. Roberts, Hansen said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. We need to resolve this issue before you make any more decisions. I think it's in your best interest to come with me. Angela felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She could sense that things were about to spiral out of control. This wasn't just about Integra anymore, this was about her personally. She had no idea how deep this investigation ran or who was behind it, but one thing was clear: someone was trying to take her down. Taking a deep breath, Angela slipped her phone back into her pocket. She needed time to think, to figure out her next move. Going with Hansen wasn't an option. She couldn't let this meeting fall apart. Not today. I'm sorry, officer, but I can't leave right now, she said, her voice steady. I have a meeting with Mr. Braden that I need to attend. Whatever this is, it's going to have to wait. Hansen's expression darkened. Ms. Roberts, you don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. I'm not asking for your cooperation, I'm demanding it. If you don't come with me now, I'll be forced to take more drastic measures. Angela's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. This was the moment where things could either escalate or de-escalate, and she needed to tread carefully. Her mind raced, trying to calculate her next move. She couldn't afford to be seen as resisting the police, especially not in a high-profile setting like Bancroft Capital. But she also couldn't let this officer bully her into walking away from the biggest deal of her career. Just as she was about to respond, the door to the waiting area opened, and a man in a sleek, tailored suit stepped in. Jonathan Braden, the CEO of Bancroft Capital. His entrance was like a shift in the atmosphere, his presence immediately commanding attention. MS, Roberts Braden said smoothly, his voice deep and authoritative. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I see you've met Officer Hansen. Angela turned to face him, relieved by his arrival but also wary. Did Braden know what was going on? Was he part of this? Mr. Braden, Angela replied, forcing a polite smile. Yes, we were just discussing something unexpected. Braden's sharp eyes flicked to Hansen, and for a brief moment, there was an unspoken exchange between them, something that Angela couldn't quite read. Officer Hansen, Braden said, his tone cool and measured. I wasn't aware that there was any issue involving MS. Roberts. Hansen didn't flinch. It's a matter of ongoing investigation, Mr. Braden. I was just about to take MS. Roberts with me for further questioning. Braden's expression didn't change, but there was an undeniable edge to his voice when he spoke again. I'm afraid that won't be necessary. MS Roberts is my guest today, and we have urgent business to attend to. If there's anything you need from her, I suggest you take it up with her legal team after our meeting. Hansen's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Very well, he said after a moment, his voice clipped. But this isn't over. I'll be in touch. With that, Hansen turned and left the room, leaving Angela and Braden standing in the now tense silence. Angela felt a rush of relief, but it was tempered by a growing sense of unease. This was bigger than she had realized, much bigger. And now, even Braden was involved. Thank you, she said quietly, not sure what else to say. Braden waved a hand dismissively. Don't mention it. But we need to talk. Now. Angela nodded, following him as he led her down the hall toward a private conference room. The biggest deal of her career, was still on the table, but now it was shadowed by questions, suspicion, and fear. What had started as a routine business meeting had spiraled into something far more dangerous, and Angela knew that the next few hours would determine everything, not just for her company, but for her future. Angela followed Jonathan Braden down a long, sleek corridor lined with art that must have cost more than most people's annual salaries. Normally, she would have admired the expensive pieces or the strategic use of minimalism to create an air of exclusivity, but today she could hardly focus on her surroundings. Her mind was spinning, replaying the strange events of the last few minutes, her intuition screaming that something was very, very wrong. The moment the door to the private conference room closed behind them, Braden's demeanor shifted. Gone was the charismatic, composed CEO she had expected to meet. Instead, his face was tight with concern, and his eyes flickered with a kind of controlled panic. He motioned for her to take a seat, and she obliged, placing her phone face down on the table in front of her. She needed to remain composed, no matter how surreal the situation had become. Braden didn't sit down. He paced near the window, his back to her, looking out at the sprawling city below. The silence stretched for several uncomfortable moments before he finally spoke. MS. Roberts, he began, his voice low but firm. I'm not entirely sure what Officer Hansen told you, but I can assure you that this, he gestured vaguely at the situation. is not what it seems. Angela crossed her arms, leaning back slightly in her chair, trying to project confidence. What exactly is it then, Mr. Braden? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've walked into the middle of something I wasn't supposed to know about. Braden turned to face her, his brow furrowed. I understand your frustration, but you need to trust me on this. There are forces at play here that go beyond just you or me. This situation with Hansen, it's not personal, but you become a part of something much larger. Angela narrowed her eyes, trying to read him. Larger? You mean the supposed financial irregularities? Because my company has nothing to do with that, and if I'm being dragged into some kind of corporate power play, I need to know now. Braden sighed, finally sitting down across from her. His demeanor softened just slightly, as if he was preparing to let her in on a secret he'd been holding back. Integra Solutions is an impressive firm, Angela. You've built something extraordinary, and that's precisely why you were chosen. But what's happening here? It's not about your software or the financial deal we're discussing today. There's something else going on. Angela's mind raced. Chosen? For what? And by whom? She leaned forward, her voice sharpening. Chosen? What are you talking about, Braden? You're not making any sense. Braden hesitated for a moment, glancing down at his hands. There's a reason you were approached for this deal, Angela. This contract wasn't just about integrating your technology into our systems. You were brought in because we need you for something much more sensitive. Angela's eyes widened. You're telling me this was a setup from the start? That I was brought in under false pretenses? Braden shook his head quickly. No. The deal itself is real. The integration of your systems is crucial for Bancroft's future. But it's also a cover. You see, there's a larger operation at play, one that involves several key players in the international finance community. I can't give you all the details. But what I can tell you is that we're on the brink of something big, something that could reshape how the global banking system operates. Angela sat back in her chair, stunned. She had expected today to be important, but not this important. She had spent her career climbing the corporate ladder, fighting to build her company's reputation, but she had never imagined being caught up in something like this. This wasn't just business, this was political, global, and potentially dangerous. And you expect me to just go along with this? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. You think I'm going to risk everything I've built for some vague operation? Braden leaned forward, his expression hardening. You don't have a choice, Angela. This isn't just about you anymore. Your company is already involved, whether you like it or not. And if you don't cooperate, there will be consequences. A chill ran down Angela's spine. There it was, the real reason for Hansen's presence, for the sudden accusations, for the inexplicable chaos surrounding her. She had been cornered, and now they were trying to force her hand. But Angela wasn't someone who could be easily intimidated. She stared at Braden, her jaw clenched. And what if I refuse? What if I walk out of here and take this public? Braden didn't flinch. Then they'll destroy you. Your company, your reputation, everything. You won't just be facing financial ruin, you'll be facing criminal charges. And they won't stop with you. They'll come after everyone you care about. Angela's heart pounded in her chest. The threat was clear, and it wasn't an empty one. Whoever they were, they had the power to ruin her life with the flick of a switch. But she also knew she couldn't just sit back and let them pull the strings. She needed time to think, to strategize, to figure out a way to get herself out of this without falling deeper into their trap. Who exactly is they? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Braden hesitated again, But this time his reluctance felt more genuine, as if he was grappling with how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. There's a group, an international consortium of financial institutions, governments, and private interests. They operate in the shadows, pulling strings behind the scenes to control the flow of global capital. What they're planning, it's unprecedented. And they need your software to make it happen. Angela blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. You're talking about a conspiracy, a global conspiracy to manipulate the banking system. Braden nodded slowly. Yes, and it's already in motion.
Angela's stomach churned. This wasn't just about her company or the deal she was supposed to close today. This was something far more dangerous, something that could potentially shake the foundations of the world's financial order. And she was being dragged into it, whether she liked it or not.
Why me, she asked, her voice tight. Why my company? Braden leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. Because your technology is the key. Your software can do things that no other system can. It can track and analyze massive amounts of financial data in real time, across borders, across institutions. It can predict market trends, identify vulnerabilities, and even manipulate transactions if used correctly. Angela felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She had always known her technology was groundbreaking, but she had never intended for it to be used like this. And you think I'm just going to hand it over to you? She said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. You think I'm going to let you and your consortium use my work to manipulate the global economy? Braden's expression remained calm, but there was an edge to his voice now. I think you don't have a choice, Angela. You can either cooperate and come out of this with your company intact, or you can resist and lose everything. Angela's mind raced. She needed to think fast, to figure out a way out of this mess before it consumed her. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed again on the table. She glanced down at the screen. It was her assistant. Angela, we've got a serious problem. Someone's accessing our client data remotely. I don't know how they're doing it, but they breached our firewall again. We're losing control. Angela's blood ran cold. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just threatening her, they were actively attacking her company, trying to dismantle everything she had built from the inside out. She looked up at Braden, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. You're behind this, aren't you? The breach at my company, the attack on our data. This is all part of your plan. Braden didn't deny it. Instead, he simply looked at her with a cold, calculating gaze. It's already begun, Angela. You can either join us and take control of what happens next, or you can watch everything you've built crumble around you. Angela stared at him, her mind spinning. She was trapped, caught in a web of conspiracy and power plays far beyond anything she could have anticipated. But one thing was clear: she wasn't going to go down without a fight. Slowly, she stood up, gathering her composure. I need time to think, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Braden nodded, rising to his feet as well. Take all the time you need. But just know that time is running out. Without another word, Angela turned and walked out of the conference room, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She had to find a way out of this. She had to protect her company, her people, and herself. But how? As she stepped back into the lobby, her phone buzzed again, another message from her assistant. Angela, they've accessed the backups. We're running out of options.
Angela clenched her jaw, determination flaring inside her. They might have backed her into a corner, but she wasn't going to let them win.
Not yet. Gad. Angela moved swiftly through the sleek hallways of Bancroft Capital, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. The buzz of people moving around the bank seemed muffled, distant, as if she were walking through a fog. Her mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had just happened. Braden's cold, calculated explanation of the conspiracy she was being dragged into, the threats against her company, the mysterious consortium that seemed to control everything from behind the scenes, it was all too much. But there was no time to dwell on the shock of it all. She had to act. Braden had given her time to think, but Angela knew that was a luxury she didn't really have. Time wasn't on her side. Every second that passed meant her company's data was being compromised, her clients' trust eroded, and her future thrown further into jeopardy. She couldn't afford to wait. She needed a plan, and she needed it now.
Her phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't just a text. It was a call from her assistant, Jenna. Angela answered quickly, her voice low as she stepped into a quieter corner of the bank.
"Jenna, tell me what's going on," she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Angela." "It's bad," Jenna said, her tone shaky. "Whoever's behind this, they're inside our systems. They've breached the firewalls, and they've started downloading sensitive client data. We've managed to slow them down, but they're still gaining access. I don't know how they're doing it. It's like they knew exactly where our weak points were." Angela's grip tightened on the phone. She had always prided herself on Integra's security. They had the best encryption, the best cybersecurity protocols, and a dedicated team to monitor for breaches. This kind of attack shouldn't have been possible. But it was happening, and it was happening fast. "How much have they taken?" Angela asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "We're not sure yet," Jenna replied. "But if they get into the backups, they could have everything. Financial records, client portfolios, proprietary data, it's all on the line." Angela closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. This was exactly what Braden and his consortium wanted. They weren't just trying to intimidate her, they were dismantling her company piece by piece, forcing her into a corner where she would have no choice but to cooperate. But Angela wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. "Jenna, listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "I need you to take the system offline. Shut it down completely, even if it means losing access temporarily. We can't let them get to the backups. Do you understand?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Angela could hear the tension in Jenna's voice when she responded. "Are you sure? If we shut down, it's going to disrupt everything. Our clients." "I know," Angela interrupted. "But if we don't, they're going to take everything. Do it now. I'll handle the fallout." Jenna didn't argue further. "Okay, I'll take care of it." Angela hung up the phone, her mind racing. Shutting down the system was only a temporary solution, a way to buy herself some time. But it wouldn't stop the larger threat that was looming over her. Braden had made it clear that the consortium wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted: her technology, her company, and her compliance. And if she refused, they would destroy her. She couldn't fight this battle alone. She needed allies, people she could trust to help her navigate the treacherous waters she now found herself in. But who could she turn to? In a world where trust was a luxury, finding someone who wasn't already compromised seemed impossible. As she walked back toward the bank's lobby, she noticed Officer Hansen standing by the entrance, talking to one of the security guards. He hadn't left, despite Braden's earlier intervention. His presence made Angela uneasy, a reminder that she was being watched from all sides. She considered approaching him, trying to reason with him, but something in her gut told her that Hansen wasn't a man she could rely on. His loyalties were unclear, and given his earlier threats, She couldn't afford to risk aligning herself with him. But then she remembered someone she hadn't thought of in years, but who might be able to help her now. Angela's mind flashed back to her early days in the corporate world, when she had been a rising star in the financial sector. During that time, she had worked with a brilliant but somewhat reclusive cybersecurity expert named Reid. Marcus had been one of the top specialists in the field, known for his ability to crack even the most secure systems. They had collaborated briefly on a project before he had disappeared from the public eye, retreating into the shadows to work on more secretive and sensitive operations. If anyone could help her now, it was Marcus. She pulled out her phone and quickly scrolled through her contacts, hoping his number hadn't changed. To her relief, it was still there. She hit call and waited, praying that he would pick up. After several rings, a familiar voice answered, though it sounded more cautious than she remembered. Angela Roberts, Marcus said, his tone even. It's been a long time. What can I do for you? Marcus, Angela replied, not wasting any time. I need your help. I'm in a situation, something big, something dangerous. My company's been hacked, and I think there's more going on than just a simple data breach. I need someone I can trust, someone who can get me out of this mess. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Angela could hear Marcus weighing his options. I'm listening, he finally said. Angela quickly explained the situation, giving him the rundown of what had happened since she'd arrived at Bancroft Capital, the sudden appearance of Officer Hansen, the threats from Braden, and the attack on her company's systems. She left out the more speculative parts about the international consortium, not wanting to overwhelm him just yet. Marcus was a practical man, and she needed to give him hard facts. When she finished, there was another long silence. Finally, Marcus spoke. This isn't just a random hack, Angela, he said. Whoever's behind this knows exactly what they're doing. They're targeting you specifically, and they're doing it in a way that's designed to leave you vulnerable. I know, Angela replied, her frustration growing. But I don't know who's behind it, or how to stop them. You won't be able to stop them, Marcus said bluntly. Not by yourself, anyway. If they've already breached your systems this deeply, they have resources and connections that go beyond what a typical hacker group would have. This is something bigger, something coordinated. Angela leaned against the wall, feeling a weight settle in her chest. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by Marcus only made it more real. So what do I do, she asked, her voice quiet. You need to fight back, Marcus said. But not directly. If you go head-to-head with these people, they'll crush you. You need to be smarter than that. You need to play their game, find their weaknesses, exploit them. And most importantly, you need to find out who's pulling the strings. Angela nodded, absorbing his words. He was right. This wasn't just about defending her company, it was about going on the offensive, finding the people who were behind this, and taking them down before they could destroy her. How do I find them, she asked. I have a few ideas, Marcus replied. But it's going to take time. In the meantime, you need to buy yourself some breathing room. Keep Braden close, but don't trust him. Let him think you're playing along. But don't give him anything he can use against you. And as for Officer Hansen, watch your back. He's not just a cop. He's working for someone, and it's not the police. Angela's stomach dropped. She had suspected that Hansen was involved in something shady, but hearing Marcus confirm it only made it worse. Can you help me, she asked. Marcus paused. I can try. But this is dangerous, Angela. You're up against powerful people, and if they find out what you're doing, they won't hesitate to take you out. You need to be prepared for that. Angela swallowed hard. She had known from the moment this started that there was no easy way out, but hearing Marcus say it so plainly drove home the reality of the situation. "I'm prepared," she said, her voice steady. "Just tell me what I need to do." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Angela and Marcus stayed in contact as he began digging into the breach at Integra, trying to trace it back to its source. Meanwhile, Angela returned to her meeting with Braden, playing the part of the cooperative businesswoman while secretly gathering as much information as she could. Braden, for his part, seemed oblivious to her true intentions. He continued to pressure her into finalizing the deal, subtly reminding her of the consequences if she didn't comply. But Angela kept her cool, knowing that the real battle was happening behind the scenes. As the hours passed, Marcus made progress. He was able to trace the attack back to a series of proxy servers, each one more difficult to crack than the last. But finally, he hit a breakthrough lead that pointed to an offshore account tied to one of Bancroft's subsidiaries. Angela, Marcus said over the phone, his voice tense. "I think I found something. This account, it's linked to a shell company that's been funneling money through Bancroft for years, and it's connected to people high up in the banking world, people with ties to government officials and international investors." Angela's heart raced. "You're saying Braden's involved in this?" "I'm saying Braden might be a pawn, just like you," Marcus replied. "But whoever's behind this, they're playing a much bigger game. And if we're going to take them down, we need to hit them where it hurts." Angela nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were starting to come together. She wasn't just fighting to save her company anymore, she was fighting to expose a global conspiracy, one that reached far beyond anything she had ever imagined. "Let's take them down," she said, determination burning in her voice. Angela paced in her office later that evening, the events of the day swirling in her mind like a storm she couldn't escape. It was nearing sunset, and the once bustling financial district was quieting down, but Angela's world had become more chaotic than ever. The quiet hum of her office felt oppressive now, as though the walls were closing in on her. Marcus's discoveries weighed heavily on her. The consortium, the offshore accounts, the possibility that Jonathan Braden was not just a willing participant, but perhaps a pawn like herself, it was all far bigger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. Every time she thought she had a grip on the situation, it slipped further out of her control, dragging her deeper into the tangled web of global finance, corporate corruption, and shadowy conspiracies. The phone buzzed on her desk, breaking her from her thoughts. It was Marcus. "I've got more," Marcus said without preamble. His voice sounded strained, like he'd been awake for hours digging through digital rubble to uncover the truth. "The shell company we tracked is more than just a front. It's connected to several other entities, all linked to high-profile political figures and international banking leaders. They've been moving money through various accounts for years, hiding massive amounts of capital offshore." Angela sat down at her desk, the weight of it all bearing down on her. "You're saying Braden's not in control? That he's working for someone else?" "It's more complicated than that," Marcus replied. "Braden is involved, no doubt, but there's a larger network behind this. They're using his bank, Bancroft Capital, as a hub for money laundering on a global scale. These are people with ties to everything: governments, private corporations, even military contractors." Angela swallowed hard. She had anticipated something big, but this, international finance, was one thing, but money laundering connected to military contractors, that opened up a whole new level of danger. "Why would they need my company? Why Integra?" "Your technology," Marcus said. "The financial analysis tools you developed, especially that real-time predictive model, are exactly what they need to take this operation to the next level. It allows them to move money faster, with fewer red flags. You've built the perfect tool for what they're doing. And now, they're trying to force you to hand it over. Angela's chest tightened. She had spent years developing Integra's proprietary algorithms and financial tracking software. What she had intended as an innovation to help legitimate businesses manage their finances more efficiently was now being twisted into something that could fuel a global criminal enterprise. And they were ready to destroy everything she had built if she didn't comply. "You need to leave the city," Marcus said suddenly, his voice taking on an edge of urgency. "They know you're onto them, and they won't let you stay in the game much longer. If you stay visible, they'll come for you. These people don't just ruin reputations, they eliminate threats." Angela bristled at the suggestion. Running wasn't in her nature. She had fought too hard to build her company, to prove herself in a world where people like her, black, female, and unapologetically ambitious, weren't supposed to succeed. And now Marcus was telling her to leave everything behind. "I'm not running, Marcus," she said firmly. "Not yet. There's too much at stake." "You don't understand the kind of people we're dealing with," Angela, Marcus said, his voice tinged with frustration. "They're ruthless. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their interests." "I get that," Angela said, her tone sharp. "But I'm not going to let them win by running away. If they're going to come after me, then I need to be prepared. I need to fight back." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus spoke again, softer this time. "Okay, but if you're going to stay, you need to be smart about it. You can't just go head to head with them. You need leverage, something that will force them to back off." Angela's mind raced. Leverage. What could she use against a consortium of billionaires, politicians, and criminal enterprises? It seemed impossible. They had wealth, power, and connections she couldn't begin to compete with. But there was something else she had that they didn't. Information. "What if I exposed them?" Angela said slowly, the beginnings of an idea forming in her mind. "What if I leaked the documents, the accounts, everything we found? They won't be able to hide if the whole world is watching." Marcus hesitated. "It's a bold move, but it's risky. If you expose them and don't take them down completely, they'll come after you with everything they've got. You'll be painting a target on your back." Angela stood up from her desk, looking out at the city skyline as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. She had never backed down from a challenge before, and she wasn't about to start now. "I'd rather go down fighting than be silent and watch them win." Before Marcus could respond, her office phone rang. She stared at it for a moment, then picked up the receiver. "MS. Roberts, it's Jonathan Braden," came the familiar voice on the other end, smooth as ever but with an undertone of tension. "I'd like to meet with you. In person. There are some developments we need to discuss." Angela's hand tightened around the phone. Braden had been playing his own game this whole time, but now it seemed like he was losing control of the narrative. Or was this just another move in his power play? "I'm not interested in more of your lies," Braden, Angela said flatly. "I know what you're doing. I know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, everything." There was a pause, and Angela could almost hear the gears turning in Braden's mind. "Then you know how dangerous this situation has become. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Meet me at the Bancroft private lounge in 1 hour." Angela hesitated. She didn't trust Braden. He had proven himself to be a manipulator, willing to play both sides of the game. But if he was offering new information, she couldn't afford to ignore it. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. 1 hour. She hung up the phone and immediately dialed Marcus again. "I'm meeting Braden in an hour. I don't know what he's planning, but I need you to track the location. If anything goes wrong, I want you to have my back." "You sure this is a good idea?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with concern. "No," Angela admitted. "But it might be the only shot we've got." An hour later, Angela walked into the Bancroft Capital private lounge. The space was empty, save for a few security guards posted near the exits, their eyes tracking her as she entered. Braden was seated at a table near the back, his hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. Angela approached cautiously, her senses heightened. Every instinct told her this was a trap, but she needed to know what Braden was playing at. "Thank you for coming," Braden said as she sat down across from him. "I know you're skeptical, but I want to assure you that I'm not your enemy in this." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Funny. You've done nothing but act like one." Braden sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Angela. This situation is spiraling out of control. The people I'm working with, they're not the kind of people you can reason with. Once they've decided you're a threat, there's no talking them down. And right now, you're a threat to them." "Then why are you still working with them?" Angela asked sharply. "If you know what they're capable of, why not walk away?" Braden gave her a bitter smile. "Do you really think it's that simple? You don't just walk away from these people. They own you. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, is tied to them. If I try to leave, they'll destroy me and everyone I care about." Angela studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Braden was a master manipulator, but there was something different in his demeanor now. He seemed desperate. "So what's your plan?" Angela asked, her voice wary. "You've called me here for a reason. What do you want?" Braden leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I want out. And I think you do too." Angela narrowed her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I have access to certain information," Braden said carefully. "Information that could take them down. But I can't do it alone. I need someone like you, someone with the skills, the resources, and the guts to make it happen." Angela felt her pulse quicken. Braden was offering her a way out, a chance to take down the consortium once and for all. But could she trust him? "And what's in it for you?" Angela asked, her voice hard. Braden hesitated. "I get my life back. I get my freedom. That's all I want." Angela leaned back, crossing her arms. "You expect me to believe that after everything you've done? After you've tried to manipulate me, ruin my company?" Braden's expression hardened. "I've made mistakes, Angela. But this is bigger than both of us. If we don't stop them now, they'll keep growing, keep controlling everything. You think you're the only one they've targeted? There are others, other companies, other innovators. They're building an empire, and once it's complete, no one will be able to stop them." Angela stared at him, weighing her options. Braden's desperation was palpable, and part of her wanted to believe him, to see him as an ally in this fight. But another part of her couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another one of his games, a way to manipulate her into doing his dirty work. "I'm not making any deals with you until I know I can trust you," Angela said, her voice cold. Braden nodded, as if he had expected that response. "Fair enough. I'll give you the proof you need. But just know that once we start down this path, there's no going back." Angela's mind raced. She had Marcus digging into the consortium, she had her company hanging by a thread, and now she had Braden offering her a chance to take everything down. But it was a chance fraught with danger, and one misstep could mean the end of everything. "I'll think about it," Angela said finally, standing up from the table. Braden watched her go, his eyes dark and unreadable. Don't take too long, he called after her. Time is running out. Angela left the lounge, her heart pounding. She needed to talk to Marcus to figure out if Braden's offer was real or just another layer of deception. But before she could dial his number, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. You're playing a dangerous game, Angela. Walk away now, or we'll make sure you never walk again. Angela's blood ran cold. They were watching her, and they were ready to strike. But she wasn't going to run. Not now. She dialed Marcus's number. We need to move fast, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Braden's offered us a way in. But I don't trust him. Can you dig deeper into his connections, see if we can verify anything? Already on it, Marcus replied. But be careful, Angela. If Braden's playing both sides, we're walking into a trap. I know, Angela said, her resolve hardening. But if we're going to take them down, we're going to need every advantage we can get. Angela paced in her apartment, her fingers gripping the edge of her phone. Her conversation with Marcus had ended, and although he was digging deeper into Braden's connections, she knew they were running out of time. The warning text from the unknown number played over and over in her mind. Walk away now, or we'll make sure you never walk again. They were watching her. Every move she made was being tracked, analyzed, and dissected. Whoever they were, the consortium wasn't going to wait much longer before they made their final move. Braden's words echoed in her ears. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. There wasn't much left to do except make her choice. She could take the safer option, run, hide, and hope that somehow her company, her life, and everything she'd worked for would be left intact. Or she could step into the fire, using Braden's intel, Marcus's expertise, and her own instincts to tear down this corrupt system from the inside. She glanced at the wall clock, the quiet ticking of the second hand now deafening in the silence of her thoughts. Time was running out. If she didn't act soon, they would. Just as Angela reached for her keys, her phone buzzed with another text. This time it was Marcus. Braden's connections check out. He's tied to the consortium, but he's on the fringe. Looks like he's desperate to get out, just like he said. We might have an edge here, but it's still risky. Angela felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by caution. Braden might be sincere, but that didn't make him trustworthy. She'd have to play this carefully. An hour later, Angela found herself walking into the grand foyer of a luxury hotel, one of those 5-star places where power brokers met behind closed doors to strike deals that changed the course of entire industries. The concierge nodded politely as she approached the elevator, escorting her to the private penthouse suite where Braden had arranged their next meeting. Her stomach twisted into knots as the elevator doors closed. She had no idea what to expect. Braden had said he would give her the information she needed to take down the consortium, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a carefully constructed trap. Yet she had no other option. This was her chance to get ahead of them, to gather enough evidence to expose the entire operation. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors slid open to reveal an opulent suite, bathed in golden light from the setting sun. Braden stood near the window, his back to her, gazing out at the skyline. A large envelope sat on the table next to him, sealed and ominous. "You came," Braden said without turning around. "I said I would," Angela replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to Braden. "This better be worth it, Braden, if you're lying to me." "I'm not," Braden said, finally turning to face her. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He looked like a man who had been living in constant fear, and Angela almost pitied him. Almost. The information in that envelope. He gestured to the table. Is everything you need? Account numbers, names, transactions. It's all there. But once you have it, you'll need to move fast. They're watching both of us. Angela approached the table cautiously, her eyes never leaving Braden's face. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice low. Why betray them now, after all this time? Braden sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because I'm tired of living in fear, of being a puppet in their game. I thought I could manage it, that I could control the risks, but they're too powerful. They control everything, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. Angela reached for the envelope, but before she could touch it, the door to the suite suddenly burst open. Two men in black suits stormed into the room, guns drawn, their faces cold and professional. Angela froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Step away from the table, one of the men barked, his gun trained on her. Braden's face went white. No, wait. The second man turned to Braden, his eyes narrowing. You thought you could betray us, Jonathan? You thought we wouldn't find out? Angela's mind raced. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. The consortium had known about Braden's plan all along. They had been watching, waiting for him to make his move, and now they were here to shut it down. I and her. Let her go, Braden said desperately, stepping in front of Angela. This is between me and you. She doesn't have anything to do with this. That's not how this works, the first man said, his voice ice cold. You both made your choices, and now you'll both face the consequences. Angela's pulse pounded in her ears. She had no way out, no backup plan. Her mind flashed to Marcus, but he was miles away, watching remotely. There was nothing he could do to stop what was about to happen. But then, as if out of nowhere, a new sound pierced the tense silence, a loud crash from the hallway, followed by shouts. The men in suits exchanged confused looks, and in that split second of distraction, Angela made her move. She grabbed the envelope from the table and ducked behind the nearest piece of furniture just as the door swung open again. This time it wasn't more of the consortium's goons. It was police, real police. Officer Hansen stormed into the room, gun drawn, followed by a team of officers in full tactical gear. Drop your weapons, Hansen shouted, his voice commanding, as the two men froze in place, their guns still raised but hesitation in their eyes. Angela's heart raced as she peeked out from behind the couch, her pulse thundering in her ears. Hansen? She didn't trust him either, but at this moment he seemed like the only thing standing between her and certain death. The men in black suits slowly lowered their guns, dropping them to the floor with a clatter. Hansen's officers moved in quickly, cuffing them and pulling them away from the scene. Angela stood shakily, clutching the envelope to her chest, her eyes locked on Hansen. How did you? We've been watching Braden for weeks, Hansen said, cutting her off. He's been under surveillance this entire time. We had a feeling something like this was going down, but we needed him to lead us to the real players. Angela felt her legs buckle, and she sank into the nearest chair, her mind spinning. Hansen had been watching the whole time? He had been playing his own game, just like Braden, but at least for now she was safe. I told you not to trust anyone, Hansen said, stepping closer. But you did the right thing by coming here. We'll use what you found to take down the consortium. Angela looked down at the envelope in her hands, feeling the weight of it. Inside was everything, evidence that could expose the consortium and bring down their entire operation. It was what she had been fighting for, what she had risked everything to obtain. But something still felt off. She glanced at Hansen, a sinking feeling growing in her gut. What happens next? Hansen's expression didn't change. We'll take it from here. You've done your part. Angela stood, squaring her shoulders. No, I'm not just walking away from this. I want to see this through. Hansen's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place. This isn't your fight anymore, Angela. You've already done enough. I'm not leaving until I know they're finished, she said, her voice steady. All of them. For a moment, Hansen said nothing, just stared at her with an unreadable expression. Then he nodded slowly, as if considering her words. You're a stubborn woman, he said with a faint smile. But I'll see what I can do. Hours later, Angela sat in a dimly lit room at police headquarters, the envelope of evidence still clutched tightly in her hands. Outside, Hansen and his team were briefing high-ranking officials on the takedown operation they were planning. She couldn't hear their words, but she knew the wheels were already turning. The consortium was going to fall. But even as she sat there, victorious in one sense, Angela knew that this wasn't over. Braden had been right, there was no going back. She had stepped into a world where power and corruption ran deeper than she could have imagined, and now that she was in it, she wasn't sure if she could ever escape. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Marcus. You did it, he said, his voice sounding relieved but tired. They're going down, Angela. You actually did it. Angela closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. We did it. But at what cost? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You're in deep now, Marcus said finally. This won't be the end. There are others, people even more powerful than the ones we've just taken down. They'll come after you now. You've made enemies. I know, Angela replied, her voice calm but resolute. But I'm ready. The line went silent, and Angela leaned back in her chair, staring at the envelope on the table in front of her. She had won this round, but the fight was far from over. As the weight of her victory settled in, Angela realized that her life had changed forever. She wasn't just a businesswoman anymore. She was a player in a dangerous game of power and corruption, and there was no turning back now. The days following the takedown of the consortium were a blur for Angela. Media outlets buzzed with news of the scandal, yet they only scratched the surface. The public knew about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, and some of the key players who had been arrested. But the true scope of the conspiracy, the web of influence stretching across governments and financial institutions, remained hidden, just as Angela had suspected. Sitting in her office at Integra Solutions, Angela gazed out the window at the city skyline. The feeling of triumph was tempered by the knowledge that this victory had come with a heavy price. She had exposed powerful people, but she had also put herself in their crosshairs. The consortium was wounded, but far from destroyed. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was Marcus again, checking in as he had been doing daily since the incident. He'd become not just a key ally, but a friend, someone who had helped her survive the storm. Hey, she answered, her voice calm but tired. You still hanging in there? Marcus's voice crackled over the line. Barely, Angela said with a soft chuckle. It's not exactly what I imagined when I thought about being a CEO. Marcus paused. I've been looking into some of the connections you exposed. You were right, there's more. The consortium is bigger than we thought, and they've already started covering their tracks. Some of the people involved are disappearing, going underground. They're regrouping. Angela expected as much. People with that kind of power didn't simply vanish after one setback. They would recalibrate, bide their time, and return with even more force. She had made herself an enemy to powerful forces that weren't going to forgive or forget. What are my options? Angela asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear Marcus's perspective. Well, Marcus began slowly, you could lay low for a while, keep your head down, and focus on rebuilding Integra, or he trailed off, leaving the alternative unspoken. Angela sighed, running a hand through her hair. Or I could stay in the fight. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Angela, if you stay in this fight, it won't get easier. They'll come for you again, and next time, they'll be more prepared. You've already taken a huge risk. You don't owe anyone more than what you've already done. Angela leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. She knew Marcus was right. She had already exposed a significant part of the consortium's operations, and her own company was still recovering from the fallout. She could walk away, focus on rebuilding her life, and pretend that this chapter was over. But deep down, she knew she couldn't turn her back on what she had learned, not after everything she had seen. The consortium's power was still intact, and there were others, people like Braden, who were being used as pawns in a game they couldn't control. If Angela stepped away now, they would win, and that was something she couldn't allow. I can't walk away, Angela said quietly, her voice steady. Not now. Not after everything. Marcus sighed on the other end of the line. I figured you'd say that. So what's the plan? Angela glanced at her laptop, where a secure file containing all the remaining data on the consortium sat waiting. It was the leverage she needed, the key to unlocking the next phase of the battle. But she couldn't do it alone. First, I'm going to need your help, she said. We're going to dig deeper. We need to find out who's left, who's still pulling the strings. I want names, I want connections. And then we take them down. There was a pause, and then Marcus chuckled softly. You're a dangerous woman, Angela, but I'm with you. Let's do this. Angela smiled, the weight of her decision settling over her like a cloak. The fight wasn't over, but now she knew what she was up against. And this time she wasn't walking into the battle blind. 2 weeks later, Angela stood in a courtroom, watching as Jonathan Braden was escorted into the chamber in handcuffs. His once pristine image as the CEO of Bancroft Capital had been shattered, his connection to the consortium exposed. He had cut a deal with law enforcement, offering up key players in exchange for leniency, but he still faced years in prison. Angela had agreed to testify against Braden, knowing it was the final nail in his coffin. She had no sympathy for him. His greed and cowardice had caused too much harm. But watching him now, she felt a strange sense of closure. He had played his part, and now he was paying the price. As Braden was led past her, their eyes met for a brief moment. He nodded slightly, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge both his defeat and her victory. Then he was gone, swallowed by the courtroom machinery that would decide his fate. Angela exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. It was over, at least this part of it. The public face of the conspiracy had been taken down, and the media frenzy surrounding the case had started to die down. But Angela knew that the deeper layers of the consortium were still out there, waiting in the shadows. After the trial, Angela walked out of the courthouse, the crisp fall air filling her lungs. She had survived, and her company had survived. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The consortium had lost a battle, but they hadn't lost the war. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was another message from Marcus. Ready to get started? Angela smiled to herself, the determination burning bright within her. She had made her decision. She was staying in the fight, no matter how long it took. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. We know you're still out there. We're watching. Walk away while you still can. Angela slipped the phone back into her pocket, her resolve unshaken. She wasn't going anywhere.